Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. We are here to talk about mental health as a global conversation, and we know that the COVID-19 pandemic has taken an incredible toll, not just on the physical health of our world, but on the collective mental health of it as well. Across the globe, we've seen both an increase in individuals experiencing challenges, as well as an increase in awareness and dialogue around it. From a youth standpoint, the events of the past year and a half have amplified mental health challenges and access to mental health care at a time when mental health challenges among youth have been trending upward for years anyways. And in September of 2020, over 50% of 11 to 17-year-olds reported thoughts of suicide or self-harm. By mid-April of 2020, and at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, 192 countries had closed their schools, which caused almost 1.6 billion young people to either contend with remote learning or to forgo academic instruction altogether. With 35% of adolescents receiving mental health services exclusively from their schools, this created a real challenge in terms of reaching those students who may need help the most. Research from the World Health Organization has also found that at one point, the pandemic disrupted or halted critical mental health services in 93% of countries worldwide. Many of us also felt it in the workplace, as our work environments converged into our homes, as our kids had to stay home from school, as we saw layoffs and economic challenges happen, and as we were responsible for caring for loved ones or elderly that we had caretaking responsibilities for. And don't even get me started on the isolation piece. But now we're looking to the future. As vaccines continue to roll out and demonstrate their effectiveness, as workplaces, schools, and communities begin to open back up, we recognize that it remains just as important as ever to continue thinking about what we've collectively experienced and to acknowledge that, but also to look to the future around what post-pandemic life might look like. My name is Erin McClintock, and I serve as Vice President of Community Engagement, Impact, and Education at Everfi, a social impact global organization focused on enabling corporations and organizations to tackle some of the most critical issues impacting people today at scale. Our impact as a service solutions and digital education content work hand in hand with some of the world's leading organizations, brands, global companies, sports leagues, and foundations. And I have the privilege of leading our work in mental health. As a former clinician myself, I'm honored to be the moderator for today's webinar. And I'm joined by three brilliant and thoughtful speakers, each of whom comes from a different area of the world and a different area of practice. And we'll be bringing a different perspective to today's conversation. I'm excited to spend the next 40 minutes, 50 minutes actually, discussing the current state of mental health, talking about how organizations have had to adapt over the past year, and how to look to the future with a renewed focus that builds upon the momentum we've gained and move this into continuing the support of mental health in the years to come. So without further ado, let's get started. And I'm really thrilled to introduce today's panelists. So panelists, welcome. To start, would love for you to share your name, your role, what your organization does, and your why story for working in mental health. So Laura, perhaps we could start with you.
Sure. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, Erin and Everfi, so much for facilitating this conversation. It's really important. I'm Laura Horne, Chief Program Officer at Active Minds, and we are a nonprofit primarily based in the US, though we have a bit of a presence in Canada and Australia as well. We're really working to change the culture of mental health in society. And we do that uniquely through empowering young adults to be at the forefront in their schools, communities, and workplaces, and wherever they are. We believe young adults as the next generation are the key to ushering in the kind of widespread, deep, and sustainable change we need to see globally around mental health. So I enjoy doing the work that we do, and beyond that, my why for doing this work is probably just seeing in my own family, among my friends, among my neighbors and community, how powerful it is to start a conversation around mental health. Just sharing that I'm in the field of mental health generally opens up a conversation. And not only that, but I find that it helps us become more vulnerable with each other, to feel safer in asking each other for help, and to live more like a community and feel like we're less alone in what we're facing.
Awesome. Thank you, Laura, and thank you so much for being here. Tim, could we hear from you next?
Yeah, hello everyone. So my name's Tim Rogers. So I'm a medical doctor and a psychiatrist, a specialist in mental health. I work in a number of different mental health areas. And my role for Togetherall is as clinical director. So I'm the psychiatrist who works with Togetherall to provide that medical input there. I also work in some other areas. So I work as a sports psychiatrist too with athletes. So there's some crossover between my work and yours, Hayley. I know you're going to come and talk about that in a second. But to say a little bit about Togetherall, we are a 24/7 safe and anonymous online community for people who are stressed or anxious, or feeling low, or in fact are going through anything that they may want to share. And as well as providing that online community for peer-to-peer mental health support, we also provide other things like self-guided courses and resources or clinical tests. And yeah, I suppose my why for doing that, I think several really. I think probably the two things that I most appreciate about Togetherall are firstly the power of it being anonymous. So the sense of safety that people can get from being able to go online and talk about whatever they're going through. It's really nice to see people getting support that way. And I suppose the other, perhaps the most important aspect of my work in Togetherall is helping make the service safe. So not just that the community is moderated, but our community is moderated by professionally registered mental health practitioners, not just like me as a doctor, but also by other mental health professionals, whether therapists or mental health social workers. And so it's really nice to be able to work as part of that team, and a great bunch of people Togetherall as well. So.
Great. Thanks, Tim. And Hayley, let's hear from you.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me here today. So my name is Hayley Quinn and I am the school's mental wellbeing project manager for Burnley FC in the community. So the project, we currently have 11 mental wellbeing workers that are placed in secondary schools in the local community, and they work on a one-to-one and group basis with the students when they're experiencing mental health difficulties. So it's been running since 2019, and we work with an array of students from different backgrounds, different cultures, different ages that are in the schools that we have our staff in. Yeah, it's a really good project. You know, we've seen big changes and differences in the last 12 months, especially, which I know we're going to talk about later. And my why for working in mental health, really, I had a real interest in psychology and the psychology of the mind and behaviour, so that's what I studied, and it kind of just naturally led down the therapeutic role. So previously to being in management, I was one of the practitioners in the secondary schools delivering the project with the young people, and it's just progressed from there. But I've loved every aspect of the role, from being in the school to now being the manager and supporting the staff that are out delivering.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's great to have this diverse array of perspectives and areas of practice. And I know that there's so much that we're hoping to cover. We also invite people to submit questions in. So if you're listening to this and you have a question for one of our panelists or for all of our panelists, please don't hesitate to drop it in the chat. You can do so in the comments section if you're on LinkedIn Live, or if you're on Facebook, or if you're on our Everfi UK page. And we'll have some time built in at the end to answer those questions. But getting right into it, as we start to set the stage for today's dialogue, one of the things that I really appreciate about each of your organizations is the fact that you're data-driven. You focus on data as it relates to making an impact, measuring your work. So I'm curious to know, what has been one of the most compelling data points that you've come across over the past year, and how have you interpreted it or adapted it to base your work on it accordingly? So Hayley, maybe we can start with you for this one.
Yes, of course. So we collect data every day. The staff that work with the students one-to-one will collect data at every session that they have. The data that we collect to measure impact is very much based around the students demonstrating a reduction in negative thoughts or improved self-esteem, reduced self-harm or suicidal thoughts. But surprisingly, over the last 12 months especially, the compelling data that's been collected has been collected in the referral process. So there is a referral pathway that's been created for students that want to access support. And on those referral forms, we'll collect information about the reason for referral. And in the last 12 months, the amount of referrals that have come through as a direct result of COVID and lockdowns has been a big surprise for a lot of us, really. So we're seeing a big increase in the number of students experiencing anxiety as a result of COVID-19, which has manifested into things like social anxiety or OCD type behaviours. We've had a lot of students and young people with mental health difficulties because of family stresses, like you mentioned earlier, with parents working at home and being off school for such a long period of time. So the data that we've collected from the referral pathway has been really different this year to what it would usually be, and that's been something that we've had to adapt to. So, you know, looking at the new resources that are available that are specific towards difficulties associated with COVID-19, looking at new interventions that we can use, new training opportunities that we can find for the staff to go on so that they can then support those students the best that they can, really.
Awesome. Thanks, Hayley. That's great to hear both the positives of what you're seeing, but also the fact that it seems like there's additional barriers by which students can get the support that they need. Tim, can we go to you next?
Sure. I mean, I think the most obvious piece of data that we saw early in the pandemic was just a huge rise, similar to what you were saying, Hayley, in terms of number of new members joining our Togetherall community, you know, with challenges in their mental health. We saw a near doubling. You know, there was just a huge spike, and I suppose now that's perhaps less surprising, because I think we all know how difficult the pandemic's been for everybody. But certainly at the time, it was a very an increase of significant magnitude. I think some other data that's really interested us, as one example, is the data that we have around our student community. So we know that of our student members, something like 40% of them identify as a Black, Indigenous, or a person of colour, compared with perhaps 25% that might identify that way in a campus counselling centre. And I think we feel that that's probably because of the kind of safety and the anonymity of the community. So we feel that Togetherall reduces stigma and kind of increases ease of access. And both of those things are probably key barriers that are present for those people and those groups. And I think other data we have probably also shows up and highlights the fact that sort of isolation, so the lockdown and COVID has brought a lot of off-campus learning, out of office working, and I think we know that increases people's sense of isolation. It goes without saying that it's more difficult to have a sort of meaningful connection with colleagues and get support from them in the populations that you work or study in. And we know that of the sort of 4 or 5, 6, half a dozen things with the biggest evidence base as to what maintains our well-being, we know that social support and befriending is one of those key pillars. So I think some of the data that we have sort of highlights that for us.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tim. So Laura, for you.
Sure. I think what I can add, you know, we also collected a lot of data, especially early on, to kind of figure out what's happening there. How can we best respond to the needs that young adults have during the pandemic? And I think one of the things that was most surprising to me was seeing that many of the young adults we surveyed still felt hopeful and optimistic about the future, despite all the challenges that they were facing. I think prior to the pandemic, a lot of the conversation around young adult mental health has centered around the idea of we need to build resiliency among young adults. We need to educate them about mental health. And I think those things are really important and should be ongoing and reinforced. However, I think the pandemic revealed that young adults tend to know way more about mental health than we might think. And they certainly tend to be quicker and more ready to embrace and understand mental health than previous generations who haven't had the opportunity to grow up talking about mental health and learning about how it impacts our everyday. So it was a real reminder to me and to our team that in addition to building resiliency in education and thinking about services in these traditional ways that we think about mental health intervention, that we also need to get creative and dig deeper and get at those root causes, or maybe those supporting, reinforcing factors like the social support that Tim was talking about. I love that Hayley brought up the family issues and the need for staff support, because I think in addition to helping our young adults think about mental health in the way we want them to, we also need to be figuring out how to reinforce those things in their community and in the systems that are around them, and how can we get more at those root causes. And I think that, obviously the rise of mental health issues is not just a US problem or another country's issue, it's global in nature. So I think for us, we'd love to see more listening to and amplifying the voices of young adults, because we are going to need, what we've done isn't enough, I think, and we're going to need to get creative, and we're going to need to hear them on what the real barriers are and what's really getting in the way of their mental health, so that we can tackle this big problem together across our borders.
Absolutely. Great points, Laura. So I guess I'll start with you with this first question and then go to Hayley and Tim. As the data has suggested that you all just shared, there's been a tremendous focus on the topic of mental health over the past year, I think even more than in years past where we've seen this gradual increase. What have you seen in your work directly, and how did you have to shift your priorities at your organization to adapt? So Laura, we'll start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Erin. I think for us, the work that we do is reliant on having young adult volunteers. We are really equipping them and empowering them and giving them what they need to amplify their voices in the mental health conversation. And when young adults were struggling so much during the pandemic, they just weren't able to take on this as a cause in the way that they normally would. There were just so many layering factors that they were having to deal with personally. And so for us, it was like, okay, let's get back to the basics. We pivoted a lot of our programming to virtual settings. We started talking more about the basics of self-care. We heard from students they wanted to learn about communicating in close quarters with roommates for the first time, or family members going back home from school and having to live and adapt again to living with family, managing anxiety. We also launched free virtual texting and chat platforms so students could connect with each other, and they could get reminders about mental health resources that were becoming available for free during the pandemic. We actually launched an at-work program, which was new for us, because I think a lot of employers supporting Gen Z in the workplace for the first time, and now remotely, we're looking to talk about mental health in a way that was meaningful and responsive. And so that's been exciting for us to do since the pandemic. And then I think the data collection that we've done since the pandemic has given us snapshots, real-time information that we can use to consider and keep our pulse on, so that we can continue to be responsive, and also give that to other folks and to the fields that they can take with it what they can, and also pivot their programming around it.
Great points. And also, I think I appreciate the fact that you're focusing on the workplace. I think a lot of our conversation is focused on youth mental health, that there is not a single individual has not been impacted in some way. And behind every student, you usually have a family, many of whom are also balancing their workloads and careers. I know, Laura, we've talked about that a lot in the past. Hayley, what about you?
Yeah, so for us, the project that I manage, the mental wellbeing project, is solely based in secondary schools. So we work specifically with 11 to 16-year-olds. But the difficulty with that, especially since the schools returned in September of this year, is that they've been open, they've been closed. There's been whole year groups that have been off because they've all been isolating. So we've witnessed the increase in referrals and the increase of referrals associated directly with COVID-19. But then our work has been really disruptive, and it's been difficult to be consistent with it because the schools haven't been able to be consistent themselves. To tackle that, we looked at, when the schools were closed, we offered telephone chats with the students. We contacted the parents to do check-ins with them and see how they were getting on with the children at home. The schools set us up on their video calling systems so that staff could video call students and keep in contact with them. And in some cases, we went out on home visits to visit the students in their homes. So it was really about how can we maintain the relationships with the students that we've already built, and how can we offer support to those students that aren't able to come into school but yet need that support. So it was quite a big shift in practice for us, because prior to that, the delivery had only ever been face-to-face. So there was a big change for staff and for the schools and the students as well. But it worked really well. We got good feedback from it. The students really appreciated having that person that they could keep in contact with to support their mental well-being whilst they were off school. So that was probably the biggest priority and the biggest change for us in terms of practice in the last 12 months.
Thanks, Hayley. I appreciate the way in which you're able to meet students where they're at and provide some semblance of consistency in a really inconsistent time for many. Tim, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think your question, just to reiterate, it was noticing that there's been a tremendous focus on the topic of mental health during 2020. In no small part because of the pandemic. And I think one of the reflections I have about it is that it, not just because so many more people have been going through difficult moments, I think it makes it clear that we all have mental health, right? Every single one of us. And we can't necessarily predict what's going to happen in life. There can be a global pandemic that nobody knew about. And actually, any of us could have a change in our mental health. And so therefore, we all need to take some time to look after it, right? And to make sure we know what sort of self-care looks like for us. And I think also we probably should have known before the pandemic that finding solutions to address people who experience mental health problems is something that is done on a huge scale. And particularly during the pandemic, that scale became even bigger. Right? And so I think we need a solution to try and meet the need that's there, especially when the need grows suddenly in a situation like this. And I think probably it's true to say that in online mental health and online wellbeing support, the landscape is quite cluttered. So there are lots and lots of apps and lots of providers out there. And I think one thing that I think is important is that it's been necessary for people to be discerning about what kind of support they choose or who they choose to provide for that. And I suppose there are key things around that choice, such as, is that mental health solution safe? And what's the evidence base behind that mental health solution so that we know that it really works? And also, I think it's made it so clear that it's necessary to innovate, isn't it? And potentially do things differently than we have done in the past, because you just can't really address a situation like we've had when everything stays the same.
All excellent points. So I guess moving into the future, right? We've acknowledged, yes, the past year was really challenging for many of us. I think that folks are starting to get to a point where we're ready to think about what next. But at the same time, we really can't let our foot off the gas around this catalytic movement that's happened around mental health. So as we start to think to the future, let's end with one final question about the past year, which is, what's been the most surprising to you? What's been the most surprising thing about the past year, either in a good way or in a not so good way? And Tim, maybe we can start with you this time.
Yeah, so it's a good question. I mean, I think I have to say, that COVID was surprised everybody. There was just no way that we could have predicted that. And also all of the sequelae and things that followed on from COVID, all of the even related to things that have nothing to do with mental health, that are not even necessarily economic, related to people's physical health. So yeah, I mean, I think it's been a tumultuous time, hasn't it? And I think probably that doesn't need, no one watching this needs me to say that. That's pretty obvious. I think what has surprised me a little bit is the exponential growth of Togetherall during that time. And so, we understood the benefits of being able to get support online in a safe way and anonymously. But I think, people being locked down and not able to see each other suddenly made online connection, the only way we could have any connection, whether it was through Togetherall, or whether it was through WhatsApp, or whether it was through Zoom. And I suppose in some ways, there are obviously positives and negatives to connecting that way or to working in that way. but it's been normalized, and it's definitely proved its worth, I think. And yeah, like I alluded before to the sort of to the fact that lockdown has showed us how important self-care habits are. But I think I hope that one of the things that will happen in terms of the future will be that will continue. So even after COVID recedes, vaccines prove out, I hope that actually that will be something enduring that goes into years ahead, whereby there is a culture now that we know that we need to kind of look after ourselves and how we do that.
Absolutely. Great points. Hayley, what about you?
I think the most surprising thing to me for the past year in a positive aspect is just the adaptability and the resilience of people in general. So, especially working with the age group that we work with, yes, there's been an increase in the number of referrals, and there's been an increase in difficulties around mental health because of COVID-19. But at the same time, everything that was given to us, as a nation, we just adapted and moved forward. So, the schools closed, the schools opened, and then it was all of the rules. People just seem to keep going, and that surprised me a lot, to be honest. But in a good way. It surprised me and made me feel hopeful for the future. If I was to think of what surprised me in a negative way, I would probably just the scale of the impact that the pandemic has had, for reasons aside of people contracting the disease. So for things like the increase in suicides, the massive increase in unemployment and people reaching poverty, the huge spike in people accessing food banks. I think possibly there's a little bit of naivety in it, in that I didn't realise that it would have such a big impact, or that it would carry on for so long, really. So yeah, they're definitely the two biggest surprises for me over the last 12 months.
Thanks, Hayley. Laura?
Sure. I think the surprising thing to me is that it hasn't been all that bad. And I think there are some other countries who are still dealing with the pandemic, and it's still going, and we're not to the end of it yet. But I think that what we heard from our network was that for many, they experienced more flexibility and empathy from educators or from employers and managers than they ever had before. And people are really hoping that that sticks around post-COVID. And I think that's really important. And you see that a little bit with the incident that happened with Naomi Osaka at French Open, when she kind of said, like, I'm tired. I've been dealing with these issues. I need to set some boundaries. And we still live in a world, obviously, of the result of that. We can see that the world doesn't yet respect that or appreciate that. There may be times when we need to set boundaries for ourselves, and they might break cultural, societal norms wherever we're at. And I think that's true whether you're in school and you're needing accommodations to succeed. I think it's true when you're in the workplace and you need to take a break. I think around leave of absences, there's a lot to be done in kind of destigmatizing needing to take a mental health break or to take a long period of a break just to pace yourself. And people really want to just continue doing life at their own pace and have maybe more in the driver's seat to do what's best for them without dealing with the stigma of needing to set those boundaries and kind of explain why they need those boundaries. So I hope that sticks around. I hope that from Active Minds, we can help support that. And I think we'll see more of that in the future, which I think is a really positive thing to think about.
Absolutely. I agree. I think on the silver linings front too, I think about the way in which some of the things that were previously out of reach. So the number of people who were able to work remote, that's expanded a lot. And now a lot of workplaces are thinking about how to accommodate remote employees, regardless of their return to office plan, which I think from a work standpoint opens up so much more talent. I think from what we've seen at Everfi, the degree to which people are really interested in mental health and really want to make a positive difference and talk about it, I think has grown exponentially in a positive way. All of you have probably felt the busyness of the past year within your respective roles. And I think it's a great thing that we're talking about mental health so openly and seeing leaders take a stand on it and putting practices in place. And I agree, Laura, I hope it does continue. So now I'm going to move into some specific questions for each of you. before we start to wrap us up. And again, if you're joining us, please feel free to chat in questions that you have for our attendees. We're doing really well on time. So I guess, Laura, I'll go right back to you. So at Active Minds, you work closely to mobilize youth around the topic of mental health, and you have deep insights into the young adult voice. So what have you heard about the experience of young people? And then how can we as a society, regardless of what our role might be in knowing young people, how can we best come together to make an impact?
Well, I think they appreciate options. And we saw this with the rise in telehealth during COVID. And we've asked our young adults what they thought about the fact that telehealth wasn't always an option prior to the pandemic or not easily accessible. And what do you think about that? And I think we heard from a lot of young adults, well, it's not necessarily my preference to all the time see a therapist virtually, but I like the fact that that's an option, and that, like, say one day it's hard for me to get there, or I'm running out of time or something, just to be able to maintain my plan without having so much trouble navigating those barriers that might come up that are, unforeseeable. I think just knowing that, like, hey, I have lots of options to me, and I can also explore them, and some of them may not work, but some of them will. And that's, I can go through that trial and error process and figure out what works best for me. I know what those options are. They are accessible, they're affordable, they're meeting me where I am. And that's something we need to look at, especially when we see this rise in young adult mental health issues. We really do need to take a pause like we're doing here and think about what were the wins, and ask young adults what were the wins, or whoever it is that we're trying to serve, and let them kind of guide us and lead us. And then I think they really want to see mental health continue to be a top priority, and they don't want to have to segment that out depending on where they're at. They want to bring their full identities, whether it be at home, school, in the workplace, in their place of worship, in sports, in their communities. They don't want to have to segment out parts of them to be accepted, and that all impacts their mental health. So they're thinking about this very progressively. They're thinking about this in ways that we don't normally think about as mental health. And that's the future. So the faster and the more we can embrace the way that they're thinking about it, the more ahead we will be, and the better we will be able to tackle this huge challenge that's before us.
Absolutely. I feel great about that, being our future leaders. Okay. So Tim, question for you. So your organization harnesses the power of connecting people with one another. So I'm curious to know, how have you seen this play out during the pandemic and then also beyond? And what are some of the most impactful elements of social connectedness that those who are attending today can bring into their everyday lives?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And so I've been with Togetherall for around 2 years now. And I think that in that time, one of my roles in the service is to coordinate and have some oversight over the clinical research that happens. And we have a number of different research partners around the world, including Harvard Medical School and Rutgers University, and actually universities in the UK too. And I think some of our projects look at in detail the specific question that you asked. And I think so we see inside our community that there are very many different psychological processes that go on all the time between members that we feel contribute to the benefits they get in their mental health. And so just to give you some examples of those, I think, often people who sign up to the service feel a sense of isolation or feel a disconnectedness, and just joining up to a community that you're part of, that you feel a sense of belonging inside, and you see a similarity between yourself and the other people who are there, and a similarity between what you're going through and what they write about in the community. I guess that sense of togetherness is really, really powerful for mental health. And not just how we feel, but how we can sort of function too. But as well as, I suppose, cohesion and togetherness, we see other kinds of things going on between members. So just sort of sharing of like care and empathy. So, just the idea that there's somebody there who understands what you're going through is really powerful. We see that people learn from other members. So they look and hear about other people's journeys to recovery. and you can gain ideas about whether that might be your journey or whether your journey might be different, and if so, how. Sometimes we see that people inside our community get a kind of call to action. So they see somebody's journey and actually they're prompted to actually go and do something about whatever it might be that they have, whether it's learning how to sleep better, or whether it's deciding that they want to learn some relaxation, or whether it's deciding to have a conversation with that difficult family member that they've been putting off, or whether it's being a bit more open-minded to some medication that somebody prescribed to them that they previously refused, but then they saw somebody who'd actually had a good experience with it. So all of these kinds of things go on in the community. And another example is just sort of helping others, actually. So getting benefit in your own mental health because you know that you've actually helped somebody else. So that sort of altruistic idea. Or feeling a sense of gratitude because somebody's helped you, feeling sort of thankful for what they've done. And these are just sort of a few examples. I'd say there are dozens and dozens of different kinds of processes that happen between people that are interacting with each other. And so that's what we see, and that's what we would like also to research in a kind of quite sort of scientific way, so that we can actually demonstrate that formally for people rather than just have someone like me describe it.
That's great. Thanks, Tim. I especially appreciate the gratitude piece. I think that there's not enough credit that goes towards gratitude and the impact it can have on our mental health. And I have gratitude to the three of you for being here today. So Hayley, one question specifically for you. There are many, many ways that organizations can give back. Why was it that the Premier League chose mental health education as part of that work?
So that's a really interesting question as well. I remember when I first started my role, we were given an introduction to the charity's CEO, and he kind of gave us a brief summary of how the project came to be in existence, because it's the first of its kind for Burnley Football Club, but it's also one of the first of its kind really for the majority of English football teams that are on the Premier League. So it was just all to do with the stats in the local community. So, the number one leading cause of mortality for 11 to 17-year-olds in the UK was suicide. The number of young people reporting self-harm had increased by over 50%. There was all of these things, and the community that we are in Burnley, specifically in Lancashire, was experiencing that a lot without any support from the charity at the time from a mental health perspective. Now, Burnley Football Club, Burnley FC and the community are very involved with the local community. They offer over 80 projects within the organisation across all age ranges. So they really saw it as another opportunity to support the community by using the power of the Premier League and the reputation of the local team. The Premier League themselves, obviously, the focus for all big funding and on TV, in all services at the minute, in schools, in workplaces, is mental health. So it just made sense for them to provide us with the opportunity to target that within our community and to make a difference. And I mean, I would be surprised if the Premier League didn't offer this sort of opportunity to more clubs in the next year or two. I would imagine that we will see more clubs joining and offering the same type of support in different areas as well, because it is something that needs attention from people and from organisations like the Premier League. So it's great that they're doing it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Hayley. I think we see a lot of that at Everfi too, where we work with organizations across the globe to bring mental wellness education into classrooms. And in large part, it's because organizations and corporations want to make an impact. They want to see that impact, but they also recognize that oftentimes schools and school districts don't have the resources that they should have or that they need to be able to really make an impact. So they have to choose between, do we provide upstream mental health education, or do we provide the counseling services that students need? And it really shouldn't be a question of which. It should be a question of, how can we do both? So, so appreciate that perspective. So I do see some questions coming in. Thank you. We are going to get to those. In just a minute, I have one more sort of broad question for the panel, and then we'll throw it out to questions for the audience. But where do you see the future of mental health going? All of this has been discussed. We've had a great dialogue. What do you see the future of mental health being? Laura, let's go to you this time.
Okay, I think I talked about more flexibility, more options. I hope that's where it's going. I wouldn't say I know for sure that's where we're heading, but that's where I hope is a part of it. I think it's important that mental health be more self-driven and more preventative and proactive in nature, more innovative. We talked about that a lot. And I think we have demonstrated, I think, through what we've seen during COVID altogether, is this needs to be more of a community-wide responsibility. There's so much that everybody can do to be a part of the puzzle, and there's so many different types of mental health support that someone can choose to access or receive to support their mental health in the ways that they want to. So I think we need to see more options, we need to see more creativity, innovation, and we all need to see the role that we play in supporting mental health.
Awesome, thanks. Tim, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have to say, I think the stigma around mental health changes. It does change. It is changing, but it changes very slowly. And in my work as a psychiatrist, I still all the time see people who feel that it's weak to admit you're struggling, rather than feeling like it's actually something very strong and powerful that you've done to come forward and say that. So I really hope that one of the answers to the question is that that mental health will slowly be understood as a thing that we all have, and that the stigma around that will slowly change. I think we spoke about innovation. We spoke about the need to meet the scale of demand for intervention for mental health problems, but I suppose also we should be talking about prevention. So rather than meeting a need for care or intervention, we should be talking about sort of population health. So knowing that the main determinants of mental health are things that we can change, and things like education, housing, water supply, all of those things, they have an impact on mental health, and we need to be thinking about that in a global way. Not least because the better we get at population health, the less we need to spend and invest, and the lower the sort of sense of scale is for actually intervening and treating all the problems that people can then have. So yeah, I think those are probably the bullet points that I would raise.
Absolutely, great points. I especially appreciate the interconnectedness. I spend a lot of my time thinking about mental health within the context of financial wellness and physical wellness and environmental wellness and social wellness and all of the different other aspects of people's lives that are connected, that mental health runs a line straight through. It's not just mental illness, right? There's mental health.
Yeah, I agree.
Really, oh, yeah. Sorry. Thanks, Tim. Hayley, what about you?
I definitely agree with what Laura and Tim have both said, in that prevention rather than intervention when mental health problems are already established. So, I mean, statistics show that 50% of adult mental health difficulties manifest during childhood or adolescence. So I think I don't know if it's going to happen or going to happen quickly, but what I would love to see in the future is well-being and how to care for your well-being being a fully integrated part of the curriculum in schools. Even things like how to breathe from the stomach rather than from the chest, so that you're not activating your fight or flight systems, how to use relaxation techniques, how to recognize critical thoughts and unhelpful patterns of thinking and what to do about it. If we could integrate that into the education system as part of the curriculum, then we will build the tools, the skills and the interventions into young people, so that they have those just as the same as how they have their maths, their science and their English, and they know how to use that going forward. That's definitely what I would love to see, because then we're creating a better future for young people. We're getting the resilience in and the tools needed from an early age, which people will carry that with them for the rest of their lives. So that's definitely what I would like to see for the future.
Couldn't agree more. And I will share something optimistic, is that we're poised to reach over almost 500,000 students with our mental wellness basics course this year through Everfi. So it's 500,000 more students than had that education last year, but not nearly the number of students that deserve to have it in the future. So those are all the formal questions that we have. We do have a question from the audience, and welcome folks to continue putting them in. So I'll let you raise your hand if one of our panelists has an answer for this question. So the question is from LinkedIn, and it is information wellness on anyone's radar? For example, helping individuals consume quality content online, content that informs and educates in place of content that polarizes, misinforms, and raises an individual's overall anxiety. I certainly have some thoughts on that, but any panelists want to raise their hand if you have thoughts as well?
I can say something very briefly about that. I mean, and I think so. Inside our Togetherall site, we have we curate and collect a range of useful stuff and mental health resources that we signpost our members to inside our service. So I suppose we keep an eye on the information wellness for our members in that way. But I definitely agree. So as a mental health practitioner, and I think that many other mental health practitioners watching or listening will have had the experience of people coming to see you for support, having read a lot, and sometimes the things that they read are really accurate, and they're very sort of professional about what they bring to a consultation, and sometimes really not. And sometimes, I think I really see that at the coalface in terms of. I think the question was about having read information that can polarize or misinform or raise anxiety. Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and I think it's a really difficult one to address, isn't it, on the in society in general, because the tech companies are not great at keeping people safe in the World Wide Web, and it's not just information wellness. There are many other ways that's an issue as well. And I suppose that's for us, that's a nice thing about providing our support within the service, is that we get to not just curate the information that we have, but we also moderate the comments and the information that members share between each other, potentially.
Absolutely. Laura or Hayley, any additional thoughts?
I think in terms of what we do with the young people, for information wellness, obviously with young people, social media content is quite a big influencing factor on things like self-esteem and how they see themselves in general compared to other people in the world. So we tend to do quite a lot of work around how to safely use social media, how to recognize the difference between an unedited photo versus an edited photo, and what kind of thoughts that could provoke, and how to prevent that moving forward. We also look at things like the importance of gaining likes and gaining comments on things that they post, and how does that link in with their sense of self? So in terms of information wellness for the younger people that we work in, we target it to the things that are specific themes within those age ranges, so social media being a really big one. So we do a lot of work to try and promote confident use and safe use of social media, so that it doesn't have that detrimental effect on their overall well-being and their self-esteem and how they see themselves in the world.
I think real quick, I can just add, I think, when we think about our in-person human bodies, we are so thoughtful about where we spend our time and who we spend it with. And virtually, especially when we're just scrolling, we have no control over how we're spending our time or who we're spending it with and what we're seeing and what we're thinking about. So I think for us, we tend to, we tend to encourage boundary setting. We tend to encourage setting, thinking about those sources that you really trust and going directly to them versus waiting for a social media platform to bring that up for you. Just taking more control over your wellness and well-being, and working on building a self-awareness as to what your personal boundaries are and how you're feeling and what you can handle, and feeling confident and taking charge of yourself and doing what you need to do to protect yourself.
Thank you. I think those are all fantastic points. And I feel like information wellness is a topic that in talking about, I guess, I don't know about silver linings, but things you've become more aware of during the pandemic, it's certainly one of them. You know, at the beginning when there was an influx of information, constantly changing every day, not knowing where to get news, coupled with, in the US at least, it being an election year that was highly polarized and highly emotional for many people. I think we had to be more aware of that than ever. I will say, you know, we talked a little bit about some of Everfi's educational programs, which are free to schools and school districts across the US, thanks to the sponsors that we work with. One of them is actually on digital wellness. It's called Ignition. And it's for middle and high school students, and it teaches them about where do I get accurate news? How do I separate myself from the things I see online? And how do I be a good citizen as it relates to standing up for someone who's being bullied, or when I see an encounter that's not healthy? So we can certainly share more information about it if there's interest in folks. But agree, one of those things that I hope maintains on the radar coming out of the pandemic as well. It's really important. So as we start to close out, I'd love to invite any or all of you to share any final thoughts you have or key takeaways that you want the audience to walk away with. So feel free to raise your hand if you have one, and we can kind of go in order.
I can just jump in with one that I don't think we've touched on yet, is just what it means to be supportive of people who you're encountering who might be struggling. And I think one of the things that we like to emphasize is that you don't need to be an expert to support somebody, and you really don't need to do much at all. It's about being there and knowing that what works for you isn't always what's going to work for someone else. So it's not about knowing what works and being able to help someone adapt what you found works. It's about just being a friend, being an active listener, responding without judgment or criticism, and supporting someone in exploring all the things that are available to them, and letting them do that at their own pace.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that Laura just said. I don't really think I've got anything extra to add to that, other than that, you know, mental health is something that everybody has, just like your physical health is something that you have. It can be good or bad. You know, if somebody has issues with the physical health, there doesn't seem to be a stigma around going to see the GP. But then if somebody's struggling with their mental health, there still seems to be, as you said, Tim, that slowly changing stigma around mental health when there are difficulties with it. So just if anybody takes anything away with them today, it's just to know that everybody has mental health, whether it's good or bad. It doesn't make you a different person, a bigger person, or a lesser person. It's just a human experience that's shared globally. Sharing it with people and making sure that your voice is heard, but also having the right supportive network around you will put you in a much better place.
Yeah, I think that, to be honest, just to finish off, I mean, I think those are all really great thoughts, and I probably, like you said, Hayley, I think I share those. Maybe just a slight twist on one of those that I could add is that I suppose our online community is helpful because it's sort of it's available whenever you need it. It's anonymous, so we know that people can say things without being judged there, and it's safe as well. And so I suppose in many ways it would be nice if we could be not required, if we could almost be put out of business because people felt safe to say things face to face. There wasn't a need for anonymity, or people, you know, would disclose things or confide things or share things, you know, just by picking up the phone, even if it was, you know, in antisocial hours or out of the thing. So I think maybe that's a takeaway. You know, that just to appreciate that, you know, these are some of the reasons why Togetherall is helpful for people who have difficult moments in their mental health. But it is still possible to do those same things, you know, face to face.
Great, thank you. And thank you so much, all three of you, for being here today, for sharing your expertise and wisdom with the audience. We're really grateful to be partners with you on the journey to make a positive difference in the mental health of our world. And we're also really grateful for everyone who joined today. So those of you that were here on LinkedIn or on Facebook, or however it is that you're coming to us, appreciative of you taking some time to think about the role that you can play in mental health. As we say often, it's a topic that impacts us all, and it's a topic upon which we can all make an impact. So grateful for spending an hour of my day with you and for you spending an hour of your day with us. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. All of our information is available on the landing page, wherever it is that you're joining from. And we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day or evening, depending on where you're coming from. Thanks so much.